So there's plenty of videos out there that are Americans or English people sharing their thoughts on Australia, doing comparisons between Australia and their own countries, all those sorts of things. But when it comes to other countries, not quite as many. So this video is actually a German guy who has spent time in Australia. He's only put out 26 videos. He's not put out a lot, but he's done one particular video, and it's an older video, it's been around for a while, where he talks about the strengths of Australia from his perspective. And I really liked the way he was looking at it, and I also found it interesting because it gives us a little bit more insight as to how Australia is different from Germany. So let's jump in and have a look at his video.
Every country has its pros and cons. Some countries have more pros, some have more cons, but no country is perfect. After I had traveled Australia for 1 year, I would like to share my thoughts on what I think Australia does better than my country of origin, Germany. Number 1. How people talk to each other. In Australia, it is most common to address someone with their first names. Family names do not matter that much. I have seen letters from authorities like the council beginning with Dear Molly instead of Dear Mrs. Smith. When I opened my bank account, I had the appointment with a girl just a bit younger than myself. When I went out the office, there was an old man waiting outside for her to call him in. She said to him, "Hello Arthur, how are you doing?" That felt so strange to me. I couldn't imagine what kind of relationship these two would be having that this young girl would dare to address this old man with his first name.
It's actually an interesting observation what he's talking about here, because going back to when I was in high school, we were taught, the proper way of writing a letter. And when you wrote a letter, you did address the person as Mr. or Mrs. or Ms. whatever. You wouldn't send an official or a formal letter using someone's first name. It just wasn't done. So I think ever since we've started doing email, we have forgotten the art of letter writing. We have become more informal, and it's just become commonplace, even for, like you said, for councils to write to you and just address you by your first name rather than by your last name. I found it interesting what he was saying about being in the bank and seeing a bank worker addressing an old man by his first name. First of all, I realised that this guy is, in his 20s or 30s or something. So maybe his concept of an old man is different to my concept of an old man, because I would feel quite comfortable with someone like a millennial at the bank addressing someone from like my generation by our first names, because essentially, they could be one generation removed, essentially. But if he's talking about someone older, like someone who's in their 70s or 80s, then I feel a bit uncomfortable with the notion of a young worker in a bank referring to a senior citizen by their first name and not by Mr. or Mrs., because it is a sign of respect, and that's the way their generation grew up. That's what they are used to from their generation. So to me, it actually does feel a little rude to be in a situation, like in a professional situation, addressing a senior citizen, if that's what he means, by their first name and not addressing them by their last name. Maybe I'm just old-fashioned, but yeah, I mean, clearly it is now highly accepted here in Australia. maybe it is just a younger generation thing, but yeah, I feel a bit uncomfortable with it too. So perhaps it's just that in terms of Australia versus Germany, Australia is just a little bit further ahead in terms of the generational things. And maybe down the track, Germany will catch up with Australia and they will also be doing similar things. I don't know.
In Germany, I couldn't really think of a lot of situations where a young lady would address an old man with his first name. Even when you're in hospital and you have heaps of time to make friends with the nurses, they are most likely to still address you with your family name. Hello, Mr. Smith, how are we doing today? That creates such a cold distance between individuals. It is very common in Germany that when you work for a company for 2 years, that you don't even know your boss's first name.
Wow, I can't imagine working somewhere for 2 years and not knowing my boss's first name. Everywhere I've worked, it's quite normal to give your boss a bit of a ribbing, to stir them up, just be typical Australians. So to have that added level of formality where you have to address them by their last name would be so weird. It would certainly make for a less happy work environment, I think, because it is nice to have that kind of cohesion that exists in a work environment where you feel almost equal to your boss. You know you're not equal, but they treat you as an individual, as a human being, and you refer to them by their first name because that's just what we do in Australia. So, yeah, that one surprised me a lot.
In Australia, no matter where you go or who you get to know, everyone is immediately your mate. Of course, there are black sheep, but you get the general idea. The downside to that, for me personally, is that you can never know who is your actual friend. In Germany, it takes a long time to really make friends with someone, but once you're friends with him, you know that he will try to move mountains for you.
Now, that's an interesting one too, where he's saying, because everyone speaks to everyone by their first name in Australia, you don't really know who your friends are. I think maybe that's just a cultural thing because I guess, for Australians, we know who our friends are and who our acquaintances are, but maybe for a foreigner, it's not like that. But in terms of him saying, well, in Germany, when you know someone's your friend, they'll move mountains for you. In Australia, we have this sense of mateship. So many Australians, they might just be an acquaintance, but they'll still move mountains for you because Australians do help other Australians out regardless of how close their relationship is. So I think that's the main difference there. I also think that for someone from another country who is travelling Australia for a year, then it would be very surface level that you would be making acquaintances and it would be hard to form solid friendships. So I guess it would be hard for him to make a comparison as to, well, all these people talk to me by my first name and they all seem really, really friendly, but they're not really my friends. How do I know they're my friends? So maybe it's just that lack of understanding that, well, this is the way Australians treat everyone. And no, it doesn't mean you're our friend, it just means that we are friendly people. And I don't mean that in a negative way. I'm just trying to understand his perspective.
Number 2. That might sound a little surprising, but school uniforms. If I were to wear school uniforms back in the day when I was still a kid in school, my life would have been a lot easier. When I went to school, I got bullied on a regular basis for years and years. And no, I'm not asking for anyone's pity, I'm doing just fine. Back in the day, my parents were only able to get me second-hand clothes. When the new PlayStation 3 came out, guess who got a used PlayStation 1 for Christmas? But I was happy with what I had. I liked my clothes, I enjoyed playing PlayStation 1. But only my classmates seemed to have had a problem with me being poor. And of course they were picking on me for the clothes that I was wearing. I remember the time where you were only cool when you wore soccer shoes as your everyday shoes, without the spikes obviously. And the coolest shoes that you can buy were these Nike 90s. Obviously my mom wouldn't have enough money to buy me those. But we went to Deichmann anyways, which is a big German shoe chain franchise. Every town has one. And Deichmann has their own home brand called Victory. They were copying designs of famous shoes, make a few adjustments and sell them cheap. And so it was that I didn't get Nike 90s, but Victory 70s. I personally was so proud. I loved those shoes. But you can imagine my schoolmates' opinion on them when I brought them to school. So yeah, that's a very personal reason of why I would prefer school uniforms over plain clothes.
You know, I have to agree with him 100% on that. Because kids, especially teenagers, you know, at primary school level, a lot of kids don't really care how other kids dress. But when you get to high school, there is that whole competition between who has the best clothes. And I can relate to what he's saying. When I was in high school, I was from a single parent family, and thankfully I was in a high school where school uniforms were compulsory. You had to wear, even the shoes had to be the right shoes. Um, you weren't allowed to wear makeup or anything. It was an all girls school, which meant that there was some really nasty people there. There's something about all girls schools that there is some real cattiness that can go on. And for me, I used to dread free clothes days because my clothes didn't come from the expensive stores, and the bullies would point that out. So I totally get where he's coming from. Kids will find ways to bully other kids in schools. Unfortunately, that happens. And I personally think schools need to take a tougher stance on bullying, but that's for another time. But certainly, by having all students in uniform, it just eliminates one source of bullying. I will, however, point out the one problem, and that is that it seems that these days school uniforms are just ridiculously expensive. So that for some families, getting all their kids in school uniforms is just a nightmare financially. And it means trolling the op shops and hoping you can get a cheap uniform at the op shops, or hoping you can get a second-hand uniform through the school. And still that can be financial stress for families. So it's a shame that we can't go back to the days when school uniforms were still quite reasonably priced in terms of what you were getting. They weren't, the prices weren't jacked up because they were a school uniform and they had the embroidery on them. So, you had to buy it so we can jack the price up because we know you've got to buy it anyway, that kind of thing, which does happen.
Number 3. I don't know if there is an official term for these things, but I call them twist lids. Some glass bottles, I think mainly beer bottles, they have a lid that you can just twist off, so you don't need a lid opener but your bare hands. You can even easily just twist the lid back on the bottle and put it back in the fridge.
Now that's interesting that they don't have those twist lids in Germany because, we just take them for granted here. So I'm curious now what other countries have them. I'm guessing that probably the UK does. America, who knows? But if you know other countries that have those twist lids on their bottles of alcohol, let me know.
As I have mentioned in previous videos already, there's so much technology that I have discovered in Australia that Germany, meanwhile, appears to me like a medieval country. Which is a good transition to my next point, number 4, digitalization. In Germany, you have to work yourself through a huge stack of paperwork for pretty much anything. In Australia, you can transfer your car insurance by just updating your car details in an app and you're good to go. In Germany, they would send you a new contract via mail that you would have to fill out and sign and send them back. Because in Germany, a contract is only valid when it's physically signed. It is getting better slowly, but we are still far away from being as digital as Australia.
Well, that's another interesting one. Simple things like that would just make every day easier. I kind of take for granted and just think, well, that's just the way it is everywhere. And like, these days, even if you get a form sent to you, you can do it the old-fashioned way, and you can print it out and fill it out by hand, and then scan it and send it back. Or you can use a PDF reader or like a form filler app, where you can basically fill out the form right there on your digital device, and even sign it on your digital device. You don't have to print it out. You just fill out the PDF, then save it and send it off, and still no paper, no forms. And wow, imagine living in a country where you couldn't actually do that.
Another thing is that in Germany, cash is king. And I know this is a bit controversial. Of course, I see the benefits of cash, but also the benefits of card. And Germany is a bit too cashy in my opinion. When you take the bus, you either pay the driver with cash or you show him the ticket for the month that you have previously purchased somewhere. When you go to a restaurant in Germany, it's very unlikely that they accept card. It didn't happen just once to me that I forgot to bring cash to a restaurant, so I had to leave a deposit like my ID, go off, find an ATM and bring the money. So if you go to a restaurant in Germany, make sure that they accept card before ordering something. The other extreme is that in Australia a lot of restaurants do not accept cash, but at least they warn you with a sign at the entrance about it. In Germany they don't. I think they should just leave the choice to us whether we want to pay with cash or card.
Okay, on one hand, I disagree with places that no longer accept cash and want you to pay by card. But at the same time, I can't remember the last time that I carried cash. Most things these days you pay with by card, and it sounds like it's completely different in Germany. I would be forever forgetting to get cash out. I mean, it is just so convenient to be able to go out and do stuff and not have to worry about whether or not you've got enough cash on you. And a lot of it you don't think about either these days. Think about the different apps, like in terms of the Myki card, which is the public transport here in Victoria. I just top that up when I think it's getting low, and I don't even have to think about it. So I can just, I can make sure that I've got enough in there. But if I've topped it up fairly recently, then just have to tap the card. Don't have to worry about paying for the train because it's already paid for. It's there on my card. Same with parking. We've got those pay park or whatever. There's an app that basically allows you to put in your car rego on the app, and then all around town here there's different codes for each street. So the code starts with like our postcode, and then it has another 4 digits, and that's the digit for the street. And basically it means I don't have to worry about whether or not I've got coins in the car for parking. But not only that, it is saving me a fortune in parking, because let's say I go to the reject shop, for example, instead of having to put in just a $2 coin to dash into the reject shop for 10 minutes, 15 minutes, I use the app. You just press start parking, you get back in the car, stop parking, and it's probably cost you 15 cents as opposed to $2. So, I think the way things are in Australia is it's a good thing. And I can't imagine, like, Germany must be so far behind in that terms of that sort of thing, because there's definitely a lot of convenience to not having to carry cash on you. So, thanks for listening. If you're new, hit subscribe. Please hit the like button and leave a comment below.